Hello, lovelies! It's Iris here with a layout I made for Get It Scrapped. Our assignment was to use creative stitching techniques. I have Pinterest board of stitchery embroidery projects that I want to do anyway. So I went there and found this little pincushion that I really loved, the rainbow effect of the stitches. So I decided to do that. I went in Photoshop and printed myself this little template on vellum. I just took the background off of, removed the background and duplicated the stitches, elongated and resized and whatnot. And I printed out this template for myself just to give me a rough guide. I'm using a hole piercer to mark off the ends of where I roughly want to have the rectangles of stitching so that I can have a guide for putting a wash of color on each column. The little pillow is on a fabric that is colored, but I wanted to stay with the brightness of a white background, but I didn't want it too stark. So I am going to reinforce each column of stitching with the same color, which is kind of a little watercolor wash of that color behind the stitching. I pulled out my distressed inks. I'm not huge on mixed media. I'm getting myself more and more into it. And this is one of the things that I love to do, though, is to use distressed inks and other inks. My favorite white cardstock is from Paper Accents, and it is the heavyweight cardstock, which is 100-pound in white smoke. It is super duper thick and super duper smooth. I don't know if you can tell, my practice piece is not the same. And so when I do the swash of color on the practice piece, I'll freeze it so you can see that on the practice piece, the color is splotchy and it's much smoother on this cardstock that I use for my background. I'll put a link to that cardstock in the description. Watering down distress inks works really well, and I love using this Heidi Swapp mat to do it. Just right on the mat, sprinkle a little water. It works perfect for that. I will give you a list of the inks that I used, and most of them were distressed. There are a couple that weren't. So for the distress inks, I used Worn Lipstick, Barn Door, Spiced Marmalade, Mustard Seed, Shabby Shutters, Tumbled Glass, and Dusty Concord. And then I also used from W+9 their Spiced Pumpkin, from Studio Calico, Limelight, and from Ranger and a pigment ink, I used Sailboat, and that worked perfectly well. In fact, I'm doing it right there at the moment. Works perfectly well with just watering it down. As you've been seeing, I'm just playing with mixing the colors to get the right tones and shades that I wanted. Just trial and error. Finishing up here with that last very light lilac color, and then we're going to move on to stitching. I started off the stitching sitting on my couch watching TV, because that's what most of us do when we have to do stitching by hand, at least. It can be very time consuming and somewhat tedious, so it's nice to just do it while you're binge watching Netflix or something. But I decided that I wanted to show you guys some of this because this layout, the whole point of it was creative stitches, and I'm not just doing one type of stitch. I'm going to do several. So here on the powdery blue color, I am just marking holes in pairs, and I was doing it random lengths between the holes. And then I'm going to do a running stitch. So for the running stitch, you come up from behind and on one hole, and then the very next hole you come down, and then the next hole you go up, which is what I'm doing right here, and then the next hole you go down. Oh, now I had a little bit of that purple that was coming across there. Just had to take that out of my way. So here I am, the hole right next to the one I came up, I go down. That's a running stitch. You just go up, down, up, down, each consecutive hole. And it just for me on this particular one, I varied the distance between the holes, and that's how you get sort of a random look. And there you see me, I'm about to finish off that column of color. And I really love that. Oh, it's one of my favorite colors. I really love how cute that looks. And as I finish off, we are going to move on to the lilac. So if you've noticed that I had already stitched the rectangles themselves, I'm going to use the same kind of stitch here, and that is a back stitch. And that's what you see a lot of people do on layouts. So what you do is you come up the second hole. Say you're on a row. You don't come up on the first hole. You come up on the second hole, come up, and then you go back to the previous hole. That's what you're seeing here. So then when you're done that, you skip over and then come back. So, all of you that do stitching on layouts are probably very familiar with that stitch. And I'm really doing this as a tutorial to show the people that haven't even, maybe haven't tried stitching on layouts. I wanted to show you how you handle it and how you go back and forth and that sort of thing. So I'm finishing off that row, and I used the back stitch on that lilac color, also the aqua, which is it's going to be in diagonals, but it's still the back stitch, and the light green also is using, no, that one's using the running stitch. The vermilion color is going to use the back stitch, and so is the magenta. Here I am going to do a cross stitch, and a lot of people are probably familiar with cross stitch as well. I poked holes in little squares, and now I am going to go up one dot or one hole, and then I'm going to do the diagonal and go down. Then you come across to the other side, pull up the thread, and then go back down on the diagonal to the other side, and you get those little X's, and that's how you do it. That's why I started my journey into crafting, was when I was really young, and I picked up cross-stitching little kits, and those are on that fabric that already has holes in it. But you can do this, as you can see, on paper, no problem. In fact, it's sort of easier to stitch on paper because you have the holes and the holes don't move than it is to stitch on regular like cotton fabric. And the paper is stiff, whereas when you're embroidering on fabric, you have to use a hoop to keep the fabric taut. So there, we're gonna go a little bit faster here, and then I'm cutting out, and you can see all those little X's. Now the stitch that I'm going to do right now is one that perhaps not as many know. This one's called a chain stitch, and the reason why it's called this chain stitch is because you can put them together one after the other, but I'm using them separately to look like little leaves. So you can see here I poked 3 holes in a row. The first one is further apart, and then the other 2 are closer. And I believe here I'm showing you, I came down to real time because I'm showing you how I here struggling a little bit to thread the needle. The eyes are going as I get older. But I wanted to show you how I thread the needle and I make the knot at the end. So you normally you have one thread and you thread the needle and then it folds over. So here what I do is I kissed the needle to the end of the thread. That's how my mother-in-law told me when I was first learning. And then I wrapped it around 3 times, and then I pulled the needle through that little wrapping. And you're going to do a similar thing here with these chain stitches. So here I'm pulling the thread up, and I'm wrapping the thread around, and I'm going to hold it with my left hand. I'm going to hold it taut because I'm going to go through the same hole. And I'm sorry some of this is blocked. I think you'll be able to see a little bit better later. Same hole, pulling it through, and I'm holding it so that it forms a loop. And I'm very careful not to pull it all the way through because then you have to start over. And then you go to the second hole that's above and you poke through, but then you want to get that loop. You want to grab it. So you're poking through the loop of thread all the way until I wanted to hold it so it doesn't get too tight there. And then when you're going back down, you go to that third hole that was close by. So here we are going to go again. I go at the bottom hole here and pull all the way up. Then I'm going to go back into the same hole, but I'm holding the thread taut with my other hand and trying to get it to stay in a loop and get smaller, but I don't want to pull it all the way through. And then I go back to the back and go to the next hole up. You see it gets pretty gnarly back in the back side there, and catch that loop as I come up with the needle. I catch that loop of thread. I'm going through it, pull up carefully until I can tighten that little loop into what looks to me like a little leaf. It can also be considered a petal if you want to do it in a different color as well. And there I pulled too much, so I'm just loosening that loop a little bit. And then that third hole that was close by, you come down. And that's how you form your little, it's called chain stitch, but that's how I formed the little leaves. So at this point, I put my just pieces of cardstock that are cut in the same size as my pictures, just so I can have a reference, because I don't really want to stitch where I'm going to be covering up, right? I was stitching for days. That was enough stitching. All right, so I went on to do that off camera, and now I'm going to show you the magenta column there. This one is, I think I mentioned before, it's actually a back stitch, but I just wanted to show you how even with the back stitch you can kind of get a different look just on the position of where your holes are. So this, I did 3 in a line, and then I'm crossing them, but they're not crossed in the middle like an X. And then you can see me stitching. You go up and over, and then you skip one and you come backwards. That's the back stitch. And I sped it up a little bit more. So you go and then you skip one and you come back towards where you had already stitched, and that's your back stitch. And then now after I do that, I am going to go ahead and skip over to my very favorite stitch on this, and that is these little French knots. And funny enough, I've recently seen 2 other scrappers do layouts that had some French knots in them, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting, because I did this a month ago and I just saw a couple of process videos. So other people are doing French knots on their layouts too. All right, so I better do the description. Here I just poked a whole bunch of holes randomly. I didn't want them all lined up. And this is how you do French knot. You go up, you go from behind, and you poke through, and you pull your needle up all the way taut. You're going to use your left hand again to hold that string, but now you're going to do this little looping around the needle, which was the same thing I did when I was kissing it together to form the knot on the end of my string. Here I'm forming the knot and it's staying above the paper, and that's how you get the French knots. So I'll describe it again. Pull the needle up, thread all the way, hold it with your left hand and loop it 3 times. That works really well, 3. And then you're going to poke directly through that same hole and keep holding it taut with your left hand as the thread goes through the middle of all the other loops, and it forms the little knot. I just love the look of the French knots. They're so adorable. All right, so now I am blocking off some more. And which one am I doing now? I'm going to show you one more, and that is these little flowers. And I forgot to mention that vermilion orange color is just like the little X's, but you just poke the holes, you don't poke them in like a square where you get the X. You poke them more like you'd get a little plus sign. All right, for the flowers, I poked one hole in the middle and 5 around it, and then I just go up through the middle hole and down one of the side ones, and you come up from the side of the second hole and to the middle. So it's easier to poke through the middle the first time, but it's easier upwards, but it gets thick there with all of them coming through the middle, so I find it easier to poke down through the middle afterwards, if that makes sense. I hope so. So I'm going up from a side hole and all the way through, and then down through the middle that's getting kind of tight. So you have to really poke it in there. And I'm just about to finish with one more up and then down the middle, and we get little flowers. Now I'm gonna do the next one. So, and I did these random as well, and I just eyeballed it. Just 1 in the middle and 5 around it in, like almost like you're gonna form the ends of a pentagon or the ends of a star. And I'm poking up from the outer hole and down the middle. And I really wanted to do something different than I've seen other people do in most layouts, even creative stitching. I didn't want to just stick to a backstitch or stitching with the machine. So it was really fun to combine my love of embroidery and my love of scrapping and put embroidery on my scrapbook page. And I love this so much that I'm going to actually frame it permanently on my wall. This is not going to go hide in an album. I spent way too much time like stitching for days on this, but I love stitching, and it was a lot of fun. And I think it gives it a very unique look. And then I was kind of bending it there. I don't know, you can't see from the side, but because I used that Paper Accents paper is 100-pound weight, it is super thick, and it did not, the wash of color with all the water and all that stitching did not warp my paper background. Love it. All right, so now all that work, and I can finally start the layout process, the design process. Here I didn't want to cover up all that stitching, obviously, so I made my pictures fairly small, or 2 by 3, with the white around them, so that includes the white around them. And here I just took a glassine bag and cut it up, cut some layers to put behind them. That way I get a little bit of lift off the stitching, a little bit of interest with that, the layers that you can see, but I'm not really covering things up and not distracting from the background. These are Heidi Swapp glittery, I know, me using glitter and magenta, wow, but I do own them, and I love how that looks here. It's a glittery word package. It's Heidi Swapp. And because I had chosen to do rainbow, rainbows are awesome, I love it. I'm gonna try to do my decorating above, on the page to follow along the colors. So here I had another pack of Heidi Swapp, and these are individual letters, and I thought I'd use them first, but I decided instead to go with these little tile stickers from, I think those are Simple Stories, and in that lighter pink, and it matched the color perfectly. I pulled out lots of little word strips from my stash. I have them all together, and I went to town here. At least pretty much went to town. I really enjoy little word strips, and this page is about my two daughters graduating last June. The older one on the right, Claire, she graduated from 8th grade, so she is a freshman in high school right now. And then the younger one on the left, Maya, she graduated from 5th grade, so she is in middle school this year. And I just loved those photos my husband took before graduation ceremony. Funny little story. The graduation ceremonies were at the very same time, so we had to split up. I went and saw my 8th graders graduation, and my husband saw the 5th graders graduation, and we took photos. But anyways, he took these beforehand in front of our house, and I just loved them so much. And I decided to make this layout about like kind of affirming affirmations. That's why I used a lot of word strips. And you've been seeing me here. I decided to add some butterflies because, you know, they're growing up and changing and moving up. So butterflies are a great symbol for that. And at first, these are all punched from Martha Stewart punch, my very favorite. And at first I was going to try to use colored ones, and you saw me sort of put them on the colors areas. And then I settled on doing more neutral black and white. Actually, the top is gray and white. And I'm laying them up kind of like Sue's fish. I really admire, she does these amazing layered butterflies. They're bigger than mine, lots of layers and stitching. I'm sort of doing that on a smaller scale, but they are definitely inspired by her. And then I pulled out more of the word strips, and I decided to stick them on the side. I had not done the background centered. I'd done it off to the side a little. So here I am getting a piece of vellum. This is from Felicity Jane, a pack. Oh, I love this vellum so much. And I like that it echoes the glassine that I put behind the photos. It adds interest and a little bit of layer, but it doesn't detract from that stitched background. And because I chose one that has the like pinstripe, it gives all the little word strips little places to sit, you know. And I didn't do it like perfectly straight or anything. I put the word strips a little offset off from each other, and some of them are on a line and some cross a line. That just makes it really nice. And then you saw I was fiddling around with the placement of the butterflies, and this is what I settled on. They form a trilogy that goes up from the bottom left, and they kind of, if your eye were to kind of swoop upward, you know, they sort of follow a line. Now, these layers are made from a black polka dot paper and vellum in the middle, and then this it's a gray stripe on white, and it's an Alison Kreft fairly old piece of pattern paper, and I bought like a whole pack of just that color. And I'm moving them around a little bit so that you can see the layers a little, you know, much better. I had put them on each other with little micro glue dots from the glue dot brand. And then here I poked a hole in the middle, and I went up with my needle, and then I looped around the center of the butterfly several times, and then it gets stuck on the bottommost glue dot. So I cut it off, and now I'm putting another glue dot, so it's the thread on the bottom is cinched between two glue dots, if that makes sense. And then I cut them so the little tails, or the little antennae. And the smaller the smaller ones are just a vellum that was printed with stripes. So here are the still shots. I hope you have enjoyed this process video and tutorial. If you have, please subscribe and come visit me on Instagram and on Pinterest if you want. Just go visit and check out all the other stuff I do. I'm trying to do process videos that include other things like this tutorial on stitching, and I hope you enjoyed it and were inspired and try it out on your layouts. And then here I'm going to show you the back at the end. Look at how crazy it looks. I'm going to cover up with washi. That way it'll be safe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.